Yeah, it seems like there was at least a select group of boomers that, partially as a result of privilege, but they had access to an element of the quote unquote American dream that millennials don't really have access to. So, for example, real wages have remained stagnant, if not gone down. Meanwhile, millennials are taking on 2 and 3 times the amount of debt just to get through college, and so they're feeling that pinch, right?
Yeah.
In a way that the boomer generation did not.
Right. I mean, not that the 1970s were great, were great economically, but it feels like there was a almost a backlash among that culture, and ultimately, by the time you get to the 1980s, you're kind of Wall Street is becoming valorized in the culture and kind of lifted up as progress itself. And a lot of the people that would consider themselves kind of revolutionaries in the 1960s began to see business and capitalism as an actual revolutionary force. So, that's tricky, but that's part of that story.
So let's go back to President Obama, right? He just recently, in an interview, defended himself against accusations that he is at least partially responsible for the rise of Trump. And I think that it's a little more complicated than that. I think you tell me, what do you think happened in 2007 and 2008 with Obama? What did he represent, and how did he either live up to or disappoint the aspirations that went into office with him?
Oh, that's a good question. With him saying that, defending himself against being responsible for Trump, I mean, in a lot of ways, I would say that if he is responsible for Trump, it's in part just by virtue of him being the first black president, and there being like an incredibly hostile reaction to that within a large portion of white America. But in terms of the larger stuff, 2007, 2008, I remember before Obama emerged, I remember, I was kind of, like a lot of us, going crazy during the Bush years, thinking that our country had been taken over by a group of people who were hell-bent on war and imperialism and basically burning the Constitution. So when Obama arrived on the scene during the primaries in 2007, it felt like, well, here's a guy who gets it, and he used a lot of language. I mean, a lot of what he was talking about was foreign policy, if I recall. He was very, very adamant about kind of contrasting himself with the Bush administration and how he would do things and bring America back to a kind of state of being a positive force in the world. And even more than that, he kind of wanted to rein in a lot of the abuses of the Bush administration. He was talking about torture. He was talking about, as we know, closing Guantanamo. And I, like many others, that kind of rhetoric felt very appealing to me. I was not a big Obama supporter in the sense that I didn't drink the Kool-Aid. But at the same time, I did recognize that this was a reaction to the Bush administration in a lot of ways, and a reaction to a lot of the foreign policy stuff. I do feel like a lot of liberals projected a lot of things onto Obama for whatever reason. In part because he would be the first black president. They projected a lot of things onto him that weren't necessarily true about him, or things that he wasn't even claiming were part of his politics. But at the same time, to see after he was elected, him immediately installing Tim Geithner and other figures from the finance world in his administration, it was almost, for me, and I think for a lot of others, it was almost an immediate kind of like,
oh yeah,
wow, I didn't understand. I mean, I thought that he would be kind of a left liberal. I didn't understand that he would be such an agent for the powers that be.
Well, and so, to what extent do you think the rhetoric that the right has employed against Obama, I mean, referring to Obamacare as socialism and, portraying him as this, this Bolshevik,
right.
I mean, to what extent has that backfired now, in the sense that like socialism doesn't have the sort of punch that it once did, and now, particularly among younger people, socialism is viewed much more favorably? Is that partially a result of their misuse of the term? Or is it, as we've gotten further from the Cold War and we don't have the generational memory of the abuses of Stalinism and, the negative associations with communism, or is it all of the above?
Yeah, maybe a little of all those things. I mean, one thing that I could say is that teaching at CUNY, particularly at one of the business schools of CUNY, on that campus, there are a lot of immigrants from Eastern European countries, and countries of the former Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
and these are basically children of people who fled those places during the 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
when those places were collapsing, and they have very openly negative attitudes about communism,
Mm-hmm.
because of the experience of their parents and families. So there is that element going on, but I think you're right in terms of the larger picture of younger people. It's true. I mean, we did not grow up in the same way as previous generations in terms of our attitudes, and not only cultural attitudes, but direct government propaganda, and not only direct government propaganda, but people being arrested, people being tried, people having their lives taken away from them because of their politics. That's something, like the whole anti-communism McCarthy stuff. That's something
Mm-hmm.
we didn't experience either.
Right.
So I think it's true that there is an opening. People don't necessarily shrink from the word socialism, but older people do. I mean, when I talk to people in my family that are older about Bernie Sanders, they kind of say socialism, isn't that a step towards communism? And they say it in that kind of old school, Red Scare kind of way.
Well, and also I think older generations saw the disastrous failure of more openly liberal, left-leaning candidates, from McGovern to Mondale. And so they saw the success of the center-leaning Clinton, the third way Democrats, right? And so they think that is the way to electoral success, and they seem to be willing to compromise. I think a lot of people. I've heard a lot of even older people say, like from my parents' generation, oh well, we like Sanders, but he's never going to get elected. So they immediately resign themselves to Clinton.
Right.
Even though this is the whole point of the primary process, right, is to choose the candidate that we want to represent us. But they're already giving away the store, much like Obama did, which I think irritated a lot of people with the negotiations on Obamacare. I mean, he never planted his flag in the ground and said, you know what, we're going to need single payer, or we're going to need a public option, not-for-profit public option. Instead, he just sort of gave it away before even entering into the negotiation. And it seems like that's partially responsible for this endless rightward drift that we've been on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the feeling that Democrats have not been effective in standing up for what they believe in is true in some sense, but on the other hand, it feels like, well, maybe this is actually what they believe in. Maybe that if you listen to Hillary Clinton and the way she describes her politics, I mean, it is neoliberalism. She very much believes in the power of the private sector and would stand up for the right of insurance and drug companies to make tons and tons of money off of sick people in the United States. She believes in that. I mean, that's part of her politics, and she believes that's progressive. I mean, her slogan is she's a progressive that gets things done, and I think that's very much, a code for saying that, I will move right in a lot of ways. I mean, that Bill Clinton, that was Bill Clinton's whole kind of plan for the Democratic Party was we have to win by moving right. And we call it the center, but the center right now is where what we would call the right used to be.
Right.
And so, I think that frustration of feeling like no one stood up to the right, and now that they've essentially taken over the political system, or at least their ideas have taken over the political system. I think that is enormously frustrating to people. And, I have to say, the Obamacare thing, it was a big thing for me to be frustrated by, like a lot of other people, because for me it's quite obvious that having profit in the healthcare system is not only the wrong way to go for actually delivering healthcare to people, but it's immoral. And to see that being like the kind of obvious problem in our healthcare system, not even attempting to be addressed.
Yeah.
And then, you have like Chelsea Clinton talking about how Americans all love their insurance companies. That kind of stuff, I think a lot of people are beginning to realize these people are not for us. These people are not on our side at all. And that means that we're going to have to express our politics in a much more in a much more I would say militant way, but certainly a stronger way.
Yeah, well, that was something that always irritated me and frustrated me about the polls about Obamacare, right? The numbers always said, "Oh, it's not very popular," but they never seemed to ask the follow-up question: is it not popular because you think it went too far, or because it didn't go far enough? And I suspect that had they asked that question, I think a lot of people, myself included, would have said, "No, I'm really upset because Obamacare does not go far enough," specifically for the reason that you just said, that it's a fundamental issue of morality when people are making money off of the backs of sick and dying people. I mean, that just seems fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, and the fact that if you get sick in America, your ability to get medical care is in part dependent on your access to wealth, and that's right. Just that's a tragedy, and the fact that that's not being taken on head on by the party that's purporting to fix the healthcare system is to me just criminal. What Bernie Sanders is doing at his rallies, where he's asking people to yell out, the amount of money they're paying for healthcare and student loans. That's pretty brilliant political stuff. Like that. I think that gets to a lot of the heart of what we're talking about here, which is that more and more people, for more and more Americans, the idea of reforming the healthcare system or reforming education is not a theoretical thing that I just feel that way because I've read books. It's more and more like a fight for our lives, and a fight for especially young people realizing this is going to be their lives. It is going to be for many young people, they're going to be paying student loans for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And that reality, I think, has caused, in a lot of ways, it at least allowed Sanders and in some ways Trump to kind of capitalize on that energy. People are, I think, pretty upset, and I do think if Obama is responsible for the rise of this kind of crazy primary we're having, it's because of he's widely recognized by many people as failing to deliver on a lot of those promises. On the other hand, I should say though that Obama's not leaving office as an unpopular president. Mm-hmm. He's still an enormously popular figure, and if Hillary Clinton has any hope of defeating Trump, and I think she does, I think she could defeat him in a landslide in the general election. I think that it would be because of activating that Obama coalition. And if it's Clinton versus Trump in the general election, Obama will come out and bring everybody out, and I think that she could very well bury him. But we'll see. I hate to make predictions.
Yeah, boy, that's interesting. I worry. I think Clinton is a pretty weak candidate against Trump because she just does not pair up well against all of his strengths. I mean, I think that he would eviscerate her for all of the scandals in the Clinton past, and would just make and tying her to Wall Street and presenting himself as self-funded, which is not actually accurate. He's loaning his campaign the money, but I just and he would appeal.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the whole Trump marching into the White House Hitler scenario too. So
it could happen here, Sinclair Lewis.
Yes, that's what's tricky about this election, is because it is. I've been saying this on the podcast, is I feel like this is, if anything, historians will look at the 2016 election as a transitional moment, as a moment where that it feels like the Etch-a-Sketch of the United States has been kind of shaken, and we're starting to draw something new, and that new, whatever that new image is, it hasn't fully taken shape. And so, this election is about kind of like watching. For me, it's about kind of taking. I have to kind of always take a step back and kind of try to read what the larger trends are, and I think that will emerge as we move forward.
Well, it seems like you can view this election on a continuum, however it turns out, right? I mean, you go back to the WTO protests, the Nader thing, and then, Dean was this insurgent candidate. Then Obama was sort of like the more successful version of Dean, and then people were disappointed by that. Now we have Sanders who's coming up, and if he doesn't succeed, I feel like this wave will continue until it crests, and I don't think it crests if Clinton wins the nomination, and I'm not even sure it crests if Sanders wins the nomination.
No, I mean it's hard to tell. I mean, Hillary, you're right. I mean, she is an enormously unpopular figure in some respects, but like you said, people, especially once Sanders, if in this scenario that Clinton becomes the Democratic Party nominee, then Sanders, I assume, will have endorsed her and made a very, very kind of eloquent endorsement of why Clinton should be voted for in order to defeat Trump. I think that all of Hollywood, all of the establishment, all of the kind of liberal base will come out very, very strong about defeating Trump. The email that was sent out by Louis C.K. last weekend, where he's just kind of, he demonstrates a pretty awful handle on American politics, but at the same time, he expresses a very common sentiment among a wide section of Americans that are just absolutely disgusted and horrified by Donald Trump. And in a lot of ways, I think there might be more negative energy at him and more positive energy among liberals who would just kind of vote for Hillary as a pure kind of pragmatic decision, which is how she's succeeded before.
Well, yeah, and how other Democrats have succeeded before. And you just put your finger on why some, in fact, many on the left are highly critical of Sanders. I think that is their fear, that he's going to mobilize these people and effectively, what do they say, sheepdog these supporters back into the Democratic fold. Right.
He's a company man, 100%, and there's no way he's going to burn down the Democratic Party over this. And there's no way I see him like dropping out of the race and not endorsing Hillary Clinton.
Do you think he would?
When it comes down to it, he wants the Democrats to win this election.
I think you're right. Do you think, Nader's point, he's been critical of Sanders too, but his point is like, look, this is fine, but if you're going to give Clinton your vote, or if you're going to give Clinton your endorsement, if you're Sanders, why not exact some concessions? Do you think there's any chance that Sanders would say, look, if you need me to, if you have me endorse you and you ask me to ask my supporters to come to your side, you need to do, X, Y, and Z so that, I don't lose credibility with my followers. And even if he did, do you think that, she's at all credible enough to convince people that she would even follow through on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that you're right in that, and if anything, Bernie Sanders does have the political capital to be able to make that kind of request and to make that kind of act. That's what politics is for, right?
But would he? Do you think he would?
I think he would. I think, I don't know what that would be. My dream would be that he would make her promise to pursue single payer or something like that. But at the same time, I don't have a lot of faith that she would pursue any of those policies really. No. And to some extent, I don't have a lot of faith about that Bernie Sanders would pursue them or be able to pursue them. So yeah, that's another one that's like a scenario that could go so many different ways. But you're right. I don't think Bernie Sanders would just drop out and not endorse. But at the same time, I would hope that he would try to extract something from her. It's odd because I do feel like many of the Sanders supporters are saying, I would never vote for Hillary. Like if Bernie's not in the race, I'm not going to vote. And I think that's true. I think that a lot of them won't, but more of them will. I think, especially if
there's
Trump
polling. There's polling on that, and I think the last number I saw was 33%. Cannot envision themselves voting for Clinton, which is an interesting way to frame it. But
yeah, do you remember the Pumas of the 2008 primary? They called themselves Pumas. They were Hillary supporters that were calling for the superdelegates to support Hillary at the convention, and Puma stood for Party Unity My Ass, and they kind of felt like, let's destroy the party for Hillary. But I feel like even a lot of those people voted for Obama once he was he was the candidate.
Well, okay, so then let me ask you this, because it's a conversation we've been having on the Soapbox for quite some time now. What do you think? Is Sanders a good thing for the left, or is he a bad thing? I mean, if all he does is just re-energize the Democratic Party, I mean, that's not a particularly good thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and in a lot of a friend of mine, I can't take credit for this thought. A friend of mine we worked this out as we were texting about this last week. But in a lot of ways, the presence of Bernie Sanders in the election kind of legitimates Clinton and legitimates the Democratic Party and legitimates the whole process. When that's, I don't think the place where we necessarily want to be, particularly because if Hillary Clinton was kind of like seen as she's the nominee she's the nominee already, right? She was kind of like a foregone conclusion. And I think that would have been very bad for the Democratic Party to have basically Hillary and Martin O'Malley up there, or Hillary alone. It would have been one of those things that looks a little too obvious. So having Bernie Sanders up there, I think, is a big gives a lot of strength to the Clinton campaign, a lot of strength to the Democratic Party, because it gives off the illusion of a process, that there's an actual process going on here, when actually it's a foregone conclusion, and that narrative has already been written. But on the other hand, I can also see it, that's a really cynical viewpoint. On the other hand, I can also see, Sanders as a kind of more optimistic narrative would be that Sanders is bringing out a lot of energy that I think is energy that's been pent up in American life for a long time. And he is a sign that young people in particular are excited about a politics that is radically different. I just wish that the Democratic Party was not seen as a vehicle that could be used at all. I feel like it's a broken piece of machinery that we need a politics that moves totally beyond. And in that sense, that's why I find Trump to be exciting, because he's more aggressively attacking the party mechanics.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, my hope has been, the problem is, right, that on the left, they've been so sort of out in the weeds and so disorganized for so long that the potentiality that Sanders is bringing is allowing these disparate movements, whether it was Occupy or Black Lives Matter or the 15 Now movement, to sort of have an umbrella under which to gather and begin to communicate, right, and organize.
Right.
I agree that it's a problem if they. Well, let me ask you. I mean, so you're saying the Democratic Party is beyond reform, right? You don't see any way that power could be wrested from the people who've held the reins for so long.
Well, I mean, to me, it's like the Democratic Party is in many ways inseparable from the powers that control it, and so okay. and that's where my cynicism comes from. I mean, obviously, there's still a political machine that's powerful in the sense of that they can activate people and they can activate money and they can activate policy, but there needs to be a movement of people in this country forcing them to do things. And I don't see that necessarily happening. In other words, I see basically voting for Bernie Sanders as another way of kind of politely asking to change things dramatically. What we're asking for and what we're envisioning is even just in the sense of single payer healthcare poses such a dramatic threat to the powers that control both parties that they're willing to do quite a bit to get in the way of that happening. So that tells us a lot. And I think that, in terms of the party being a dead machine, I mean, that's the way I see it. And I feel like they have been so skilled at foreclosing on the kind of idealistic notions of their constituents for so long that I think that they need, in part, just my own sense of like Schadenfreude. I just want to see them destroyed and something new and powerful and beautiful built in its place.